Welcome to another biblically based look into today's news from Christian Voice New Zealand. Now here's Mike Bain.
Lies, untruths, deception, falsehoods. This is all we're hearing today as politicians are using narratives trying to keep you and I in fear. Now, Joseph Goebbels, a Nazi's propaganda minister, said, "Tell a lie often enough and it'll become truth." The controversy over COVID, vaccines and mandates, well, we've all moved on. And now we're back to the politicians' favourite fear-mongering subject, climate change. Yep, it is what it is, and we're all going to die. The planet is warming up. Pacific Islands will soon be underwater if we don't do anything. Now, for years I've listened to politicians promoting the new religion called climate change. New Zealand's two elected female Prime Ministers, Helen Clark and Jacinda Ardern, both globalists, have preached the end of life as we know it because of climate change. Now, both Clark and Ardern have signed New Zealand up to agreements, which we now see is costing the country financially. Now, on the surface, it seems like the right thing to do, even though our contribution to carbon emissions is low. Ardern called climate change this generation's nuclear moment, referencing how New Zealand stood up and declared itself nuclear-free last century. And who can ever forget this little blossom's outburst on the international stage?
How dare you! You have stolen my dreams and my childhood with your empty words, and yet I'm one of the lucky ones. People are suffering. People are dying. Entire ecosystems are collapsing. We are in the beginning of a mass extinction, and all you can talk about is money and fairy tales of eternal economic growth. How dare you!
You know, I've always pondered the emission trading scheme and how often asked, where does all this accumulated money go and what exactly is it used for? How can nations pay millions of dollars to fix something we have no control of, but it's the fear that our planet is undergoing change which is driving the climate change mentality? Ardern and her government are hell-bent on this issue to the point that they're willing to sacrifice both food production and our economy. Still, no one has told me how we can save the planet by taxing everyone. We see farmers working on our rivers with mitigation, which is a good thing, but really taxing farmers because their cows fart is far beyond common sense. I understand that some of you watching today might be climate change believers, and that's fine. I'm not, and I'm expressing my viewpoint. You know, every natural disaster is being credited to climate change. For example, if a South Island river is being flooded because of excess rain, it's known as a 100-year flood. But it was the same issue which caused it last year or the year before. We appear to be having these types of weather events more often, but 100 years ago, was it because of climate change we had a flood in the first place, or was it just a cycle? How many floods preceded the event a century ago? Being around for as long as I have been, and I haven't been around a century, but I recall the world was in a state of frenzy over the discovery of a hole in the Earth's ozone layer, brought about by using fluorocarbons. The hole was in the ozone was centred above Antarctica. Because of the proximity of countries like New Zealand, Argentina and Chile, we copped some of the fallout of the UV rays. Now, back in the 80s, we watched the news reports, we saw the dramatic pictures of the ice cliffs calving, something they do naturally dependent on the season. Well, the narrative back then was the ice shelf was melting and the polar bears would have nowhere to live. And it was all doom and gloom and woe for the planet. And who was to blame? Greedy industrialists, because they used gases like fluorocarbons, that's the CFCs, in spray cans and refrigerants, which break down ozone molecules in the upper atmosphere. Well, the good news is the science community managed to persuade governments of the danger CFCs pose on Earth's ozone layer, and international agreements were made and acted upon in the 1980s to reduce the production of CFCs. These chemicals, though, were replaced by hydrofluorocarbons, HFCs. Well, did it fix the problem? No. We still have an ozone hole above the Antarctic, and according to the scientists at NASA, how big it is dependent upon the season. Well, since the 1990s, surface UV levels have been relatively stable, and the ozone hole recovery has contributed to less surface UV than expected. However, while HFCs have helped the ozone layer recover, they're still causing some harm, resulting in the area reforming more slowly than once thought. Ozone holes still form regularly in Antarctica. So in reality, the sky didn't fall in, but could the ozone hole be the cause of our current weather patterns? According to the scientists, it's a bit of a yes and no answer, dependent upon where you live on the planet. Climate change, according to historians, has always been there and has impacted the Earth, and it's cyclical. All the millions being paid out for emissions tax reminds me of the question, where does all the money go and why? The residents of the Nelson area in South Canterbury wouldn't mind seeing some of that money spent in their districts on mitigation projects like flood bank protection and other projects. The ozone hole is still there. Sure, it's not as big as it was, but it's still there. Now, I may be a self-professed climate change denier, and I don't deny that countries which pump emissions into the skies don't impact our environment. But I think it's great that governments are getting together to cut these emissions. But I do worry about the future of New Zealand's economy when I see how Ardern's government is fixated on the farming community. Our hope for the planet doesn't come from the arrogance of mankind who thinks they can fix nature. It only comes from the architect or the creator of the planet, and that is God himself. Man has to remember that they're not God, never will be. But make no mistake, man will be held to account for ruining his creation. Revelation 11:18 says that God comes to reward those who have honoured his name and to destroy those who have destroyed the earth. Greta and Jacinda, you can both sit this one out. Trust that God has this all in hand. But then I forgot, these two are not believers.
Thank you for watching. You can see more podcasts like this by subscribing to Christian Voice New Zealand. For more information about our work, or if you're moved to donate, jump online to our webpage christianvoicenewzealand.com.